Hello everyone, welcome to Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. The 54th annual meeting of the World Economic Forum is nearing its end after extensive talks on a variety of issues. Among them, focus was on the positive role that AI can play, wars in Europe and the Middle East, and even the possibility of Donald Trump being re-elected as the President of the United States. For today's Within the Frame, we would like to shed light on some of those topics as we mark the close of this year's Davos Forum. And for this, we welcome Professor Ban Kil-joo from the Ilmin International Relations Institute at Korea University. Professor Ban, welcome.
Good evening. I'm pleased to be here.
All right. We also have Lee Joo-ok, a member of the Executive Committee of the World Economic Forum. Good to see you, Mr. Lee.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Lee, let's first talk about the WEF's latest survey of chief economists. More than half of them said they expect the global economy to weaken in 2024. Could you share details of their views?
So the Global Chief Economist Survey actually draws data and opinion from chief economists, both from corporations as well as public institutions and governments. And as you mentioned, I think roughly about 56% of them predicted that this year the global economy would indeed weaken. And I believe that that's actually a reflection of both the uncertainties as well as many of the challenges that lie ahead of us. Those are not just limited to risks, still remaining risks of inflation, also limited fiscal space in many different parts of the world, but also on issues like climate change, the impact that there could be on economy, on emerging technologies, and also some of the geopolitical concerns that still loom ahead of us. What is slightly more worrying for us is the fact that many of the chief economists also predicted that the pace of fragmentation in the global economy would actually, in fact, accelerate. And I think that does underscore the importance of building trust as the theme of this annual meeting has been.
All right. Well, as our Mr. Lee already pointed out, Professor Ban, the economists also added that geopolitical fragmentation around the world will only deepen, which will eventually expand economic blocs around the world within 3 years. What would such expansion lead to?
Well, the geopolitical fragmentation or tensions indeed worsen the economic crack among nations around the world. Economic blockification also will pose a greater challenge to sustainable prosperity around the world. However, to be honest with you, I'm not sure whether economic blockification is the right word or blockification could be expanded significantly within 3 years. As you are well aware, the discourse of de-risking, not the one of decoupling, is on the way now, which means the group of like-minded countries led by the United States is eager to maintain their economic relations with non-like-minded countries such as China, except for critically important technologies. To that end, the United States and China had a summit in San Francisco last November, followed by the defense level of talks recently. To be more concrete, I'm not sure whether the term of blockification is relevant in explaining the current international situation. During the Cold War, the logic of blocs was operational in the sense that the US-led Western bloc was conflicting with the Soviet bloc. Each of the two blocs remained quite separated from the other. Democratic countries under the Western bloc made military and economic cooperations only with other countries that belong to the same bloc. Likewise, communist countries helped and cooperate with other communist countries that belong to the Soviet bloc. However, as of right now, this clear blockification has not worked since China entered into international economic order through its membership in WTO in 2001. Although economic cooperation remains much weaker around the world now than in 2001, a minimum level of cooperation continues in the international arena. In this vein, I would say the logic of leagues, not the logic of blocks, is operational in the new Cold War. So it remains to be seen whether the logic of leagues will be converted back into the logic of blocks by worsening geopolitical fragmentation.
All right, I see. So basically what our Professor Ban is saying is that economic blockification would not be aggravated nor expanded considering the situation right now. All right. Well, Mr. Lee, I'd like to move on to what was really discussed during the forum here. Last year, cryptocurrency was the hottest topic, but this year it was AI. How is artificial intelligence closely related to this year's motto, rebuilding trust?
AI, indeed, I think was very prominently featured in many of the different discussions. And I think one very interesting discussion that we witnessed here in Davos was that there is perhaps a lack of awareness on not just AI's potential, but also on its limitation. So I think in order for there to be a better understanding and also an understanding to be enabled to create guardrails for this technology so that we can fully harness the potential, I think a lot of leaders stress that it's important to really understand where we are currently and also in a way demystify the technology. The reason why we feel that even discussions around emerging technologies really need to be anchored on building trust is because, as you know, that there are fragmentations also happening on different technology platforms, technology developments, which hinder, I think, the creation of a worldwide and also a coherent regulation around these technologies. And furthermore, one thing that we need to be mindful of is the growing gap that may come about between leading nations and other developing nations around these critical technologies. So how do we make sure that technologies can also be used for developing countries to leapfrog and not just be followers in that sense, I think goes back to the theme of building trust so that all different stakeholders and countries can actually work together around these themes.
All right, I see your point. Mr. Lee, one more question on AI. Some experts shared an optimistic view, saying AI will generate trillions in annual productivity, while others say there is a definite need to regulate the growth of AI, as you have previously mentioned. Could you share some of the views on AI that were made during the forum?
So again, I think to emphasize, there was a lot of attempts in 2023 to bring together different voices around the world. I think some have been a little bit more successful than others. And the emphasis here in Davos was really to try and identify both where we are and where we need to go and what kind of collaboration is essential to really get there. So the fact that we've had, as an impartial and neutral platform, as an international organization for public-private collaboration, both the voices of governments from the global north as well as global south, from the east and west, and also critically important, the voices of large corporations and also emerging startups, all discussing towards that common goal, I think was very positive. Of course, we're not naive that one conference alone can actually solve these issues and crack these challenges. But I think it was also an important milestone along that journey. We know that Korea hosts the AI Safety Summit this year, and also there are other platforms. So the continuation of dialogue, I think, will be critical in that sense.
All right, I cannot agree more. Now, enough about AI. Let's turn our focus on conflicts in the world. And so for this, Professor Ban, Ukraine's president called for Western unity and investment at Davos, while Western allies promised sustained support. However, considering the duration of the war, how would Western supporters really consider the war at this moment?
Unfortunately, situations look bad for Ukraine as time goes by. With the war prolonged much more than expected, Western supporters as well as Ukraine soldiers have faced the symptoms of war fatigue. Ukraine leaders and soldiers remain defiant against Russia despite this war fatigue, but their will to fight could be weaker without continuous support from outside. In the early stage of the Russia-Ukraine war, most Western countries were energetic in supporting Ukraine because this war served as a proxy war between status quo states and revisionist states. However, as the war continued for about 2 years, Western countries have remained divided over whether they need to continue their full support. The United States, as a leading country in the Western support group, has struggled with additional support for Ukraine due to domestic politics. The Biden administration laid out a support package of $61 billion. However, this package makes it hard to be a real policy due to strong opposition from the Republican Party. European countries that were under the most serious threat by this war do not seem different either from the United States. The EU laid out a 4-year aid package with a size of 50 billion euros, but this package has failed to be realized by the opposition of Hungary. Under this weakening resolve to grapple with the Russia-Ukraine war, multilaterally or collectively, some countries in the EU have independently been providing their assistance. For example, on 16 January 2024, France announced its plan to additionally provide missiles and bombs.
All right. So Western countries are feeling quite war fatigue right now, and this could be quite difficult for Ukraine to expect more support from now on. Professor Ban, one more question about the conflict in the Middle East. The U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan stressed that the U.S. is not looking for regional conflict there. What was discussed regarding the war in the Middle East, and what might Washington's position regarding this be?
Well, in this Davos forum, Sullivan made it clear that the Israel-Hamas war should not be escalated into a regional war in the Middle East. His comment was made in a situation where de-escalation efforts have been absent or neglected. While situations in the Middle East are getting worse indeed, the Israel-Hamas war continued for more than 100 days, and there are even signs of escalation, as shown by cases like the Houthi rebels' attacks on commercial ships and Pakistan's attacks on Iran. Washington seems to know that the United States alone is not able to deal with the two battlegrounds and control a fractured war. So the United States asks other countries to join the efforts to de-escalate all the situations. Meanwhile, we need to think over who would be the audience of Sullivan's comments to understand Washington's position. The first audience would be Israel. When Hamas attacked civilians in Israel, the United States fully supported Israel. However, Israel has conducted military offensives more than at the level needed to achieve its objectives and conduct self-defense. To top it off, Israel Prime Minister Netanyahu is reluctant to embrace the two-state solution that U.S. President Biden has emphasized. In this vein, the United States pushes Israel to be prepared for the post-war through de-escalating efforts and the adoption of a two-state solution. Second, the United States sends a message to the side of Hamas or Palestine as well. Washington emphasizes that the Gaza should not serve as a venue for making terror attacks on others, particularly Israel. What it means is that the United States will make an effort to allow Palestine to become a state, but at the same time, Israel should be secured in any case. This position is in line with the two-state solution. The third audience would be the Arab countries in the Middle East. Washington lays out the post-war architecture based upon reconciliation and peace between the Arab states and Israel. So Washington sends a message to Arab countries that the United States does not side with a specific country like Israel, but wants to make the region peaceful across the board. Finally, revisionist states in the world such as China and Russia are the audience as well. Confronted with the Israel-Hamas war, these two countries have indeed sided with Hamas to seize the initiative of the changing international order with this opportunity. In this vein, Washington sends the signal to these countries that the United States still serves as a relevant influencer or an effective stabilizer to the region so that these countries are not able to intervene in the region in their favor.
All right, I see. Interesting. Now, Mr. Lee, since you have been at the very site, how have the two wars been addressed at Davos, and in what ways do you believe the forum served as a venue to, continue the discussion?
So as Professor Ban mentioned, of course, there was a lot of attention on the U.S. position, what both National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, as well as Secretary of State Tony Blinken, as well as other leaders from federal and also state level shared their views and their sort of projections around the role of the American government. But also at the same time, I think it was important to gather the stakeholders relevant for both wars, both in Ukraine as well as in the Middle East. We've had very prominent participation despite the ongoing conflict from both regions. Of course, as you know, President Zelensky was with us here, as well as a very strong delegation from the Middle East, and also other related parties, all of those that Professor Ban had just mentioned. And I think in that sense, both being a platform to allow for significant stakeholders to send messages, but also to facilitate dialogue, I think was one of the emphasis from our side. So we've had both public sessions where we could understand more and also have leaders from private sector, civil society really get a better reading as to where we are headed in terms of these different conflicts. But also there were many private discussions that allow in these kind of heated moments an opportunity for better understanding, trying to really find common ground. And I think what was also significant that was different from previous annual meetings was that we had held, together with the Swiss government, the gathering of national security advisors from more than 70 countries to really kick off the discussion here in Davos and really try to work towards the peace process in Ukraine.
All right. Well, I agree that bringing all the stakeholders together at the one side is very significant indeed. Now, Professor Ban, interestingly, the word is that Trump's potential re-election as U.S. president was very much part of the conversation at Davos. And some even directly pointed out that his return would be a great concern for the world. What's your view on this?
As you might be aware, Trump issue is being raised on many platforms simply beyond the Davos forum. If then, why is Trump's potential re-election more attentive in this Davos forum? The reason behind this is that when the Davos forum happened, Trump won in the Iowa caucuses, serving as the first in the presidential race. What it means is that Trump's potential return is more visualized. Despite Trump's landslide victory, the unpopular incumbent of the White House, President Biden, has no intention to give up his bid for re-election to the other, unlike Lyndon Johnson's abandonment of his bid back in 1968. So the Trump issue has overwhelmed other pre-planned issues such as security and AI in this Davos forum. The Trump variable is not simply a domestic issue of the United States, but a global challenge because, first, the United States role remains the most significant for preserving this international order. And second, Trump earlier showed little interest in preserving rules-based order under the policy of America First policy. And third, he neglected alliances for America's interests. Similarly, the issue of support for Ukraine that we dealt with earlier is vulnerable to Trump variable as well. To be more precise, Trump is not much interested in preserving a liberal international order or restoring trust that was laid out as a key theme in this Davos forum. If the United States under the Trump administration neglects to maintain a liberal order and trust building, other countries from the liberal world are most likely to lower their enthusiasm to preserve a liberal international order. If this concern becomes visualized indeed, autocracies are most likely to step up their efforts to redesign on international order in their favor. This is a great concern.
All right, I see. Now, Mr. Lee, before we wrap up the show, I'd like to ask you this last question. Davos indeed gives world leaders a chance to mitigate factors that lead to global conflict. But as these conflicts make it difficult to, rebuild trust around the world, the relevance of the forum has often been up for debate. So how do you think about such a view, and how was this year's forum overall?
First of all, I want to just quickly comment on Professor Ban's analysis around the U.S. election. From our perspective, I think, of course, it was true that there was a lot of attention towards, what a potential Republican government would actually be like, and what kind of implications could be drawn from that. But at the same time, I think it would be an overstatement to say that that issue, a single issue, actually overshadowed everything, simply because there are so many different challenges that we face that we need to, and going back to the emphasis on the multilateral order and the cooperation between countries, that every leader, I think, gathered in Davos acutely acknowledged that they cannot solve alone. So there were many different discussions, and going back to your question on rebuilding trust, at the beginning of the preparation for this year's annual meeting, of course, there was a lot of concern whether the looming crisis and emerging challenges that we see would actually dampen the ambition for leaders to come together. But I think what we saw was actually on the contrary, that because of these different challenges, and also because of the realization that we currently face a grave trust deficit. I think on every leader's mind, it was a priority that we need to kind of build that foundation to be able to advance with cooperation. Again, I think the forum as an institution, we are not naive that one dialogue would actually solve all of these issues, but I think we do need to make a start. And as I've said, together with other major international platforms, ongoing dialogue, ongoing collaboration. And I think, the positive thing, again, that Professor Ban mentioned at the beginning is that, unlike during the Cold War days, we're not seeing, complete shut-off of trade or relations, even between countries that are competing. And I think one clear example is that, between the U.S. and the Soviet Union during the Cold War, their sort of annual trade is equivalent to what is now the trade between the U.S. and China on a daily basis. So all of these things, I think, make it really important that we continue to emphasize the need for collaboration. And really, the building of trust, I think, is the first step and the most important task to begin with.
All right, Mr. Lee, thank you for your point of view. Now, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Professor Ban and Mr. Lee, for your time and insights. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be next Monday with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the weekend.